The world's #1 podcast radio station. You're listening to Podcast Tonight.
Thanks for joining us on Podcast Radio. You're tuned in with myself, Clark Hartwell, for Podcast Tonight's very first chart show. Each week we'll be counting down your favourite top 20 podcasts from data collected through our website, podcasttonight.com, from our socials, and stats from big industry standard companies. We'll be taking a look at some of the world's biggest podcasts and some of the newest trending podcasts on the rise.
Counting down the planet's top 20 podcasts this week. You're listening to the Podcast Chart Show with Clark Hartwell.
So this is it. It's time to begin our very first countdown. But it's not a normal countdown, it's Christmas week. So who will be this year's Christmas #1 podcast?
The Podcast Tonight Show with Clark Hartwell.
Our very first entry into the podcast chart this week is TED Talks Daily from journalist Elise Hu, where she is joined by some of the world's leading thinkers and creators. This popular podcast will open up your mind and definitely change your perspectives.
Number 20.
I'm Elise Hu. You're listening to TED Talks Daily. Black Friday and Cyber Monday are followed by a day of generosity, Giving Tuesday. And the idea for this day has now expanded to a global movement. In her 2023 talk from TED's Infectious Generosity event, Asha Curran, the CEO of Giving Tuesday, shares what she's learned about generosity, what it is, and the powerful things it can accomplish.
Experience the best podcasts the planet has to offer at podcasttonight.com.
Trending once again on Google, this now defunct podcast has been somewhat controversial to say the least. But in at 19 this week is Meghan Markle's Archetypes podcast.
Number 19.
There's a piece of art in my sitting room. It's not fancy. It's kind of this rectangle shape, almost plaque-like. And it just says a few words very simply across it. Humankind, be both. My dear friend Genevieve gave it to me a couple of years ago. When I walk past it, it just always makes me smile, of course, because I love her and our friendship, and it reminds me of her. We've been super close since we were about 17, but also because it's true. Human, kind, be both.
The Podcast Tonight Show with Clark Hartwell.
In at 18 this week and exploding up the podcast charts due to a certain relationship with Taylor Swift is the New Heights podcast with Travis and Jason Kelsey.
Number 18.
Those delicious American empanadas, best part of the sandwich.
Empanadas. It is delicious, and I'm very happy that they've come on board. The New Heights team, thank you, Uncrustables.
We're teamed up. We are your hosts. I'm Travis Kelsey. This is my big brother, Jason Kelsey, out of Cleveland Heights, Ohio. Cincinnati Bearcat alums, all right now. And new episodes drop every Wednesday here on New Heights, especially during the NFL season. So subscribe on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast. Follow the show on all social media at New Heights Show. That is with one S. And check out the official fan club at newheightsshow.com.
Number 17.
In at 17 this week is the Bad Friends podcast, and if you love a good comedy podcast, this is definitely not to be missed.
You two are bad friends.
Who are these two idiots?
A white dude and an Asian dude. You two are disgusting.
Well, you two are something.
We're bad friends.
We walked in the studio.
Here we go.
We did a couple spots. Bob and I did a back-to-back spot at the store. And then we walked in the studio, and McCone tried to make up for all his blunders by getting Bobby in and out. That's very nice. But what did you forget? What'd you forget, McCone?
Fries.
Yeah, French fries. The quintessential pairing.
The quintessential pairings.
The quintessential pairings, I guess?
Yeah.
A burger and fries. Peanut butter and jelly. Right?
Yeah.
The world's #1 podcast radio station. You're listening to Podcast Tonight.
This week's number 16 enters from over in the UK from entrepreneur and Dragon's Den star Stephen Bartlett. This week's number 16 is Diary of a CEO.
Number 16.
Can't turn off the noise. And if I saw myself in a mirror, I'd slam my head into the mirror and just keep slamming it to make it go away. But that's why I disappeared.
But it's not the only reason why he disappeared.
Magic couldn't fix me.
Illusionist magician extraordinaire.
Are you watching closely?
Was there a moment you look back on and say that was my rock bottom?
The 6th of November 2020. Because that was the day and I tried to kill myself.
Your wife found you unconscious?
In the dog bed.
Number 15.
In at number 15 for our very first Podcast Tonight chart show are a group of bored teachers who decided to get together and share their stories of the classroom and beyond with their Teachers Off Duty podcast.
Number 15.
Hey, what's going on, educators? What's going on? This is the Teacher Off Duty podcast, the Board Teachers Comedy Tour Takeover. We're back once again with another wonderful month of great teacher conversation. That's right. And we have some beautiful people with me. Who is me? K Mac, that's who. Thank you guys for coming back and I'm trying to be serious.
We're the two people in staff meeting that can't sit next to each other because we're getting in trouble. Sorry, I was trying to hold it in, but it wasn't working.
The Podcast Tonight Show with Clark Hartwell.
Making his wisdom and knowledge go viral is this week's number 14 entry, On Purpose, with Jay Shetty.
Number 14.
The Street Stoics podcast is back. We are combining hip-hop lyrics and quotes from some of the greatest to ever grace a microphone.
It's a line from Lauryn Hill, and she says, "Don't be a hard rock when you really are a gem."
Along with ancient wisdom from some of the greatest philosophers of all time.
Seneca, right? And he says, "Your mind will take shape of what you frequently hold in thought, for the human spirit is colored by such impression."
Number 13.
Andrew Huberman discusses neuroscience in his podcast Huberman Lab, and it's in at number 13 this week.
Welcome to the Huberman Lab podcast, where we discuss science and science-based tools for everyday life. I'm Andrew Huberman, and I'm a professor of neurobiology and ophthalmology at Stanford School of Medicine. My guest today is Dr. Karen Parker. Dr. Karen Parker directs the Social Neurosciences Research Program at the Stanford University School of Medicine. The goal of her laboratory's research is to understand the biological basis of social functioning at every stage of the lifespan. So this includes the bonds that form between infant and parent or parents, as well as the bonds that occur between children as they grow up, which of course form the template for social functioning when we become adults.
Counting down the planet's top 20 podcasts this week. You're listening to the Podcast Chart Show with Clark Hartwell. Clark Hartwell. Number 12.
Thanks for sticking around as we search for our number one podcast this week. And straight in at number 12 are a couple of retired web developers, Robbie the Wagner and Charles William Carpenter III, with their fittingly named podcast, Whiskey, Web and Whatnot.
Number 12.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Whiskey, Web, and Whatnot with your hosts, Robbie the Wagner and Charles William Carpenter III.
That's right, I'm a proper bloke.
Oh, God. Yes, Chuck likes to start offending people at second one of recording. But we do have a guest today.
No, that's my normal accent. I do this American accent for the show.
You're faking it.
Yeah.
Okay, I see.
That's how I normally talk.
Stage accent.
Yeah, something like that.
Our guest today is Jay Tompkins. What's going on, Jay?
Thank you for having me. Yeah, it's nice to be on board. It's taken a while for us to get this one going.
Yeah, we appreciate you being on.
Number 11.
For over 15 years, Josh and Chuck covering the popular society and culture subjects with their Stuff You Should Know podcast, and it's your number 11 this week.
Welcome to Stuff You Should Know, a production of iHeartRadio.
Hey, and welcome to the podcast. I'm Josh, and there's Chuck, and Jerry's here too, and we're feeling fairly festive. And this is Stuff You Should Know.
That's right.
The episode before the Christmas episode.
Yeah, which has become a, I guess, tradition to do a classic toy. When did we start that?
I'd say more custom than tradition.
All right.
I'm
It's
sorry.
our Christmas custom.
I'm feeling contrary. It is definitely a tradition.
The world's #1 podcast radio station. You're listening to Podcast Tonight.
All right, we're halfway there. We've counted back from 20 to 11. It's time to get down to the business end as we reveal the first Podcast Tonight's top 10 podcasts.
The Podcast Tonight chart show.
We still have the likes of Joe Rogan and the Crime Junkies to chart, but will they be at number 1 this week?
Number 10.
For our very first ever official top 10 spot and challenging the status quo, co-hosts Ira Wolf and Jason Cochran are in at number 10 with their hugely popular Geeks, Geezers and Googleization podcast.
Number 10.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Geeks, Geezers, and Googleization Show, the home of Googleization Nation, where we talk with HR and business thought leaders about the crazy shift going on all around us and explore the disruptive convergence of technology, business, and people. Here are your hosts, Ira Wolf and Jason Cochran.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Geeks, Geezers, and Googleization, where we talk about some of the craziest shift going on in the future of work. Thank you for being part of Googleization Nation. I'm Ira Wolf.
And I'm Jason Cochran. Thank you for joining the show each and every week with us as we tackle these converging pieces around us. Everything's shifting, as Ira said, around technology, business, and people.
Number 9.
We're inside this week's top 10 podcasts, and in at number 9 and set to make your pulse race with dark stories both real and imagined with the Heart Stops Pounding podcast. It's your number 9 this week.
Welcome back to another episode of Heart Starts Pounding, a podcast of horrors, hauntings, and mysteries. I'm your host, Kaylin Moore. This is a community for the darkly curious, and I just want to let you all know that I have been indulging in my dark curiosity lately for you all. Over Thanksgiving, I visited Galveston, Texas, one of the most haunted places in America. In the late 1800s, it was a huge port city full of wealthy people, industry, casinos, you name it.
You're tuned in to Podcast Tonight Radio. Here's another awesome podcast.
Recorded straight out of Indianapolis with your hosts Ashley and Britt is the hugely popular podcast Crime Junkie, and it's in at the number 8 spot this week.
Number 8.
Hi, Crime Junkies. I'm your host, Ashley Flowers.
And I'm Britt.
And the story I have for you guys today is one that I feel so hopeful about because with your help and the right amount of pressure and attention, I think that this case, which has been largely forgotten, can be brought back to the forefront and we can help get this case solved. This is the story of Fiona Yu.
Number 7.
A top 20 podcast chart wouldn't be complete without a visit to this next podcast, which needs no introduction with over 14 years, 2,000 episodes under his belt, and smashing over 3 billion total views. This is the podcast heavyweight, Joe Rogan.
The Joe Rogan Experience.
Train by day, Joe Rogan podcast by night, all day.
Oh.
Oh, hi.
Hi.
What's up, ladies?
Whoa.
Hi.
Welcome to town.
Thanks.
Like, legit. You guys are here now.
We're here now.
How's it feel?
It feels good.
Have you said y'all yet?
Y'all?
I've been saying y'all.
Yeah?
Yeah.
When
I'm
did you
from
start?
Florida.
Oh,
Y'all.
right. You gotta
Y'all.
look. Florida's weird. It's like
Y'all
it's
and
kind
Saul.
of southern, but it's not really.
Yeah. Like SAW. Saul.
The Podcast Tonight Show with Clark Hartwell. Number 6.
In at number 6 and delving deep into the success of their guests are the hosts Graham and Jack with their podcast, The Iced Coffee Hour.
So first of all, we have to say we are so appreciative of everyone at Ramsey Solutions. We're back with John Deloney. Really appreciate it. Thank you for your time.
Dude, thanks for your hospitality. Let me hang out with you guys.
Absolutely. So what do you say to people who ask what you do?
This is such a weird diversion for what I was doing for the last couple of decades that I still haven't fully wrapped my head around what it all is. And so I just tell people I'm a mental health guy.
So what did you do the last few decades?
I was the dean of students at different universities and a professor. I was just a nerd and an academic nerd. And then I would sit with people when their world had exploded. And I just did student conduct stuff. So I was the guy that was like, hey, you can't sell drugs. Or I was the guy investigating sexual assaults. Or I was the guy calling parents and saying, hey, your kid's not going to make it through the night. You need to come. So most of my job, there was a front-facing component where you talk and all that. But most of it was sitting with people just like this.
So the term for that, I believe, is crisis management.
Yeah. That's where I lived. And then I worked in the police department doing that too.
Counting down the planet's top 20 podcasts this week. You're listening to the Podcast Chart Show with Clark Hartwell.
Thanks for joining us on Podcast Tonight's first chart show with myself, Clark Hartwell, and we've made it to this week's top 5. But just before we reveal who's made it to number 1, I would like to invite you over to podcasttonight.com, where we have hundreds and hundreds of podcast reviews for your enjoyment.
The Podcast Tonight Chart Show.
So without further delay, let's get into this week's first ever official top 5.
Number 5.
Interviewing guests who live outside the normal 9-to-5 grind is this week's number 5 with the Big Truth podcast.
We have a liftoff.
Number 4.
One of our favourite podcasts and one we've reviewed over at Podcast Tonight is Tech Talk with Matthew Dickerson, where each week Matthew discusses the advancements in technology and AI. Tech Talk is this week's number 4.
Tech Talk with Matthew Dickerson. At Matthew Dickerson. Tech Talk. Sit back and relax. It's time to talk technology.
Hello, thrill-seeking funsters. It's time to take off those rocket-powered roller skates that keep you constantly on the go. It's time to flop into your favourite comfy recliner, the one with the refrigerated cup holder and the USB charger port, and set the sound level to soothing, because it's time for Matthew Dickerson to whisper sweet nothings into your ear. Except it won't be just sweet nothings, folks, because this week, Matt has a bunch of solutions to future problems that you didn't even know about. Isn't that right, Matt?
I love when technology solves a problem that you didn't know you had.
Yes, that's right.
And I think about that sometimes with our smartphones, that we have apps now that do things that we didn't know we needed to do. It doesn't matter what it is. It might be you're sitting around a dinner party at night time and looking up and someone says, oh, I wonder what that star is up there, which some people do sometimes. And then there'd be all the experts around the table who'd be guessing, knowing, whatever.
I just pull out my sky map.
That's right. You pull it out and go, you put, oh, well, that's there. And actually there goes a satellite across the sky. And there's, well, if we look in there, we probably can't see it, but there's a planet over there.
And you can see Mars.
Counting down the planet's top 20 podcasts this week. You're listening to the Podcast Chart Show with Clark Hartwell.
And that's it. We've counted down from 20 to 4. It's time to reveal your top 3 podcasts for our special Christmas edition this week. We've studied and reviewed thousands of podcasts from across the globe, and this is your official top 3.
Number 3.
Discovering the planet's very best side hustles is the job of podcast host Tracy Brinkman, who finds his podcast, The Dark Horse Entrepreneur, at the number 3 spot this week.
Number 3.
Hey there, audacious parents. Welcome to the Dark Horse Entrepreneur Podcast, where we're not just about surviving, we're about thriving. If you're tuning in, you're not looking for just another feel-good, pat-on-the-back kind of show. No. You're here because you're ready to disrupt the status quo. You're ready because you're here to challenge your limits and to step out of the comfort zone where we know growth never happens. This is not just your average, let's all be happy with our 9-to-5 lives kind of podcast. We're here to give you actionable strategies. We're here to dive deep into the world of side hustles, digital marketing, and smart income-boosting tactics. Why, you may ask? Because we're designed for parents like you, parents juggling family expenses, childcare, and the elusive me time. We're not just about making money, though. We're about designing a life. A life that you dictate, not one that's been prepackaged in a soul-sucking 9-to-5 box. So, if you're ready to break free and design a life that aligns with your dreams, design a life that aligns with your family, you're in the right place. The Dark Horse Entrepreneur Podcast.
The world's #1 podcast radio station. You're listening to Podcast Tonight.
Okay, hold the show. We've counted down from 20 to number 3, and I can tell you that battling it out for tonight's very first number 1, we have a comedy podcast and a science podcast. Shall we see who's made it to number 1 this week?
Number 2.
From demons and slashers to cults and serial killers, taking the number 2 spot is a dark and twisted podcast that leaves nothing to the imagination. Your second spot on the top 20 podcast show this week is Last Podcast on the Left.
Easy it was. Can you imagine Can you imagine the different tone of the movie if it was alive with an exclamation point like Fame? Yeah. All right.
Welcome to Last Podcast on the Left, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Marcus Parks. I'm here with Henry Zabrowski.
I'm alive.
And Ed Larson.
Partially alive.
Reasonably alive.
And unreasonably warm to do this episode.
Yeah, man, pop your shirt off. We'll get some ice in here. Oh my God. Let's get some buckets of ice. We can just pour it around that place because things about to get a little chilly.
The wait is over. This is this week's number 1 podcast. Number one.
With guests such as Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos discussing on-trend topics like AI, science, and philosophy, your official first ever Podcast Tonight chart show number 1 is the Lex Fridman podcast.
Number 1.
You spent a lot of your childhood with your grandfather on a ranch here in Texas. Mm-hmm. And I heard you had a lot of work to do around the ranch. So what's the coolest job you remember doing there?
Wow, coolest.
Most interesting, most memorable.
Most memorable.
Most impactful.
I mean, it's a real working ranch. And I spent all my summers on that ranch from age 4 to 16. And my grandfather was really taking me those in the summers. In the early summers, he was letting me pretend to help on the ranch because, of course, a 4-year-old is a burden, not a help in real life. He's really just watching me and taking care of me. And he was doing that because my mom was so young. She had me when she was 17. And so he was sort of giving her a break. And
the world's #1 podcast radio station. You're listening to Podcast Tonight.
Thanks for tuning in with myself, Clark Hartwell, for a look at the top 20 podcasts around the world this week. We'll be back next Sunday for a special New Year's Eve chart show. But the question is, will Lex Fridman make it to 2 weeks at the top of the chart? Or will we have a new podcast to take his spot?
Thank you for tuning in to the Podcast Tonight chart show. We're back counting down the podcasts next Sunday.